Today in global geopolitics, two headline stories converge. First, President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine is pressing the United States for long-range cruise missiles, seeking to shift the dynamics of his war with Russia. Second, in the Gaza Strip, Hamas is signaling its intention to remain in control of local security during a transition period, refusing to fully disarm even as international peace efforts advance. In this video, we'll explore what these two stories mean: the weapons request in Kyiv, the strategy in Gaza, and how each could reshape regional conflict.
Zelensky traveled to Washington seeking advanced weaponry, especially the U.S.-made long-range cruise missile known as the Tomahawk. He argues that such systems would allow Ukraine not just to defend, but to strike deeper into Russian territory. The logic is, if Ukraine threatens high-value Russian military or infrastructure targets far behind the front lines, Russia might be compelled back to negotiation. But there are big risks. The U.S., under President Donald Trump, appears hesitant, citing depletion of stockpiles and the danger of escalation.
Supplying Ukraine with Tomahawks would mark a shift from purely defensive aid to offensive capability. That changes the bargaining power on the battlefield and at the negotiating table. Moscow has made clear that introducing such weapons would cross a red line, raising the risk of a wider conflict or deeper U.S. involvement. For Ukraine, the request serves a dual purpose: one, to bolster its military posture, and two, to strengthen its diplomatic leverage. Zelensky says the very possibility of Tomahawks could force Russian President Vladimir Putin to consider talks.
Meanwhile, in Gaza, Hamas is refusing to commit to full disarmament as part of a transitional governance plan. A senior official recently stated that Hamas intends to keep security control during the period to come. The group is navigating intense pressure. On one hand, reconstruction and humanitarian needs. On the other, the demand to give up weapons and control. This tension will influence not just Gaza's future, but regional stability. Understanding this helps us see why the Ukraine weapon issue and the Gaza transition are linked in the broader picture of U.S. diplomacy and conflict containment.
On the surface, the two stories may seem distinct: Ukraine versus Russia, Gaza versus Israel. But there are parallels. In both cases, we see weapon transfers, bargaining over security control, and external actors, notably the U.S., trying to shape outcomes. The differences matter too. Ukraine is fighting an international war of invasion. Gaza is a territory under blockade, with deep humanitarian consequences. The weapons in play, the actors, the stakes, and the rules are different, yet both reflect shifting global dynamics. In Ukraine's case, the question, will long-range missiles change the battlefield and force Russia's hand? In Gaza's case, will Hamas maintain de facto control, and what happens if it won't disarm?
Let's consider three possible outcomes in Ukraine. 1. The U.S. agrees to supply Tomahawks, Ukraine uses them or keeps them as a deterrent, and Russia faces mounting pressure. 2. The U.S. keeps the threat alive, but doesn't deliver. The mere possibility serves as a bargaining chip. 3. The U.S. retreats, decides weapons are too risky, and Ukraine is left seeking other options. Meanwhile, in Gaza, if Hamas retains control and refuses full disarmament, the transition may stall, delaying reconstruction and increasing the risk of renewed conflict. If Hamas gives up control and disarms, a new governance model might emerge, but factions in the wider region will challenge the result. If the international community forces a hard push and violence reignites, the humanitarian cost could surge. In both zones, the under-the-radar battles over weapons, control, and diplomacy may change the story more than the heavy fighting we see on screens.
To conclude, Ukraine's request for Tomahawk missiles and Gaza's transition process with Hamas are more than isolated stories. They reflect a larger shift in how wars are fought and how peace might be made. The key question: Will weapons and leverage drive negotiation, or will they drive escalation? As the world watches these hotspots, the outcomes will influence not just local conflict zones, but the entire architecture of global security.